All right, is everybody ready? Before we start, let me just say that there will be 3 different photographic images which will be displayed on the screen here. All of those images will be included in the press release to follow. There will be a link in the press release to follow that will allow you access to them. Obviously, you're more than welcome to take video of them as they are brought up. They're going to be brought up during the period of time when Paul Riddell, who's the chief of our Dangerous Drug Offenders Unit, or I should say division, is speaking, just by way of some level of preparedness. And Paul, you're going to signal Elliot about which slides? Okay. All right, is everybody ready? Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. We are here for a special purpose, and that purpose is to talk about a particular takedown, arrest, and prosecution involving the distribution of primarily fentanyl in the area of Kensington. And we are joined today by some wonderful people. But I want to make sure we start out by giving a ton of credit where it is due, and it is due to the Pennsylvania State Police and also the Philadelphia Police Department, who worked very closely with our Dangerous Drug Offender Unit on this investigation. As I'm sure you can imagine, these investigations sometimes connect to other investigations, things in the past, things in the future. We're not going to get into all of that, but we are going to get into the specifics of this particular investigation, takedown, these arrests, and prosecution to follow. I do want to acknowledge some of the wonderful people who are here. We have with us ADA Paul Riddell, that's R-E-D-D-E-L. Am I right about that?
Yes.
Okay. Who is the chief of the DA's Dangerous Drug Offender Unit. This is a unit that we are trying to grow, hopefully with the help of council. And yes, I know they're standing here, which is why I said that. But it's a unit that we're trying to grow into a division for reasons that we will discuss. We have with us ADA Bill Fritzy, who is the chief of the DAO's Gun Violence Task Force. He is here among other reasons because this investigation, this bust, involves guns. And guns that were used in close connection to professional drug dealing activity in the area of Kensington. We have with us Councilmember Ketsi Lozada, who is from District Number 7. We have Mark Squilla, Philadelphia City Council Member, District Number 1. We have Mike Driscoll, who is Council Member, District Number 6. And then we have Jim Harity, who is an at-large City Council member with us as well. A couple of preliminary points, I think, just to contextualize where we are. I'm not going to get heavy into the data today, but because I look at the data every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, when something pops up of note, I notice it. And this is what I noticed. As of today, 95 homicides in Philadelphia. Last year, 152. Year before, 176. Year before, 196. That was 2021. We were in the height of the pandemic. So today we're 95. And then we were 196. It is literally less than half the number of homicides that we had at the height. Is that a good thing? No. It's a good thing when we have 0. But does it show year after year steady and important improvement? Yes, it does. And part of the reason for that is busts like this, investigations like this. It's not just taking the 16-year-old off the corner with 3 little bags in his pocket. That has its place, but 60 years in Kensington have established that doesn't fix it, because those people have been getting busted all that time. This is about the kind of progress you see when there's an emphasis on big-time drug dealing and mid-level drug dealing. The mid-level in particular has been less policed, and it has been less investigated and less arrested and prosecuted than the lower level prosecution. So I think that the people who are here, and I think that our state police and Philadelphia police friends deserve a lot of credit for the reality that we are seeing sweeping changes and sweeping improvements in gun violence that should encourage us to do more and to do it better. Philadelphia District Attorney's Office began hosting regular meetings with council members, the Philadelphia Police Department, other law enforcement, other stakeholders that have become known as the Kensington Caucus meetings. This is something that we have been doing, including with each of the council members who are here today, since towards the end of the summer last year. And it's something that we continue to do, at least when we don't have earthquakes. It is something that we continue to do. Over the last several months, we have added additional partners who include additional members of the police department, the sheriff's office, the chief public defender, and people from her office, and also others from the mayor's office and other service providers who are central to the innovative approach that we are trying to bring about in Kensington. The goal of, or at least one of the goals of these regular meetings is very intentional. It is to prioritize going after gun violence and increasing public safety with a balanced approach that uses all the tools available, not just the couple that have been used and failed for decades. This kind of increased communication and collaboration has yielded very significant results in helping, in my opinion, I hope we share this opinion, but it has yielded significant results in helping us to identify common ground, opportunities for improvement, and also the challenges that I think everybody recognizes we face when we try to do something about an area that has been blighted and is and remains terribly blighted for 60 years. One of the very specific ideas that has come up out of those meetings is appropriate and strategic enforcement of priority corners and of drug houses, also known as trap houses. This is a situation where law enforcement can't just talk to itself. Law enforcement also has to talk to council members, their constituents, the people whose job it is and who were elected to let us know exactly what the problems are. And so we have been engaging in that process. And it is our hope that in a truly collaborative and coordinated way that we will be able to take down some priority drug corners, some trap houses, in a way that is similar to something this office did back in, I believe, 2019 with the with KIPP and Cambria, which was a multi-generational, decades-long, fully operating professional drug dealing operation that, with the help of our law enforcement partners, was taken down in a pretty serious way. That was another one of what I would call these mid-level drug cases. It's not Pablo Escobar, but it's also not the 16-year-old on the corner who's using and selling a few bags at a time. These are professional drug dealers. These are people who are not just doing it out of addiction. These are people who are bringing an awful lot of blight, an awful lot of misery, and an awful lot of danger to neighborhoods. All right, now having said that, I think that I should leave to Paul Riddell to explain in more detail the drug bust of a Kensington fentanyl operation, including some firearms, involving defendant Jada, J-A-D-A, Williams. Mr. Riddell?
Thank you. Good afternoon. First and foremost, I'd like to again thank the Pennsylvania State Police, Southeast Strike Force, and the Philadelphia Police Department for their endeavors and their hard work. These are the kind of cases they do on a daily basis, and these are the kind of cases the Dangerous Drug Division and what we hope to build out as a division will get involved in on a daily basis. Currently, the Dangerous Drug Offenders Unit does long-term drug investigations, mostly with DEA, but we share and collaborate with all sorts of agencies, including PSP, FBI, and the surrounding counties. On that note, the case you'll see before you today is literally one of those cases that caused such disruption in a community. It's not the kilos you see, it's not the movies you see, but it's the kind of case that people see in their neighborhoods that bring violence and destruction and bring the kind of untoward activities that they don't want to keep in their neighborhoods when they want their kids to go out on the sidewalk and play. So specifically in this case, in January of this year, the Pennsylvania State Police started to conduct a drug investigation of the sales of fentanyl/heroin. At this point, I'm sure you're all familiar that most of what's out there is now fentanyl, more so than even heroin. And so they started making undercover buys, and on 3 occasions they made undercover buys directly from the defendant in this case. Ultimately, it resulted in search warrants being, or a search warrant being executed on the residence of 3125 Kensington Avenue. And in that place, you'll see, if we can get, what you see is the top photo is a further away photo, but the bag you see is a bag of bullets. And this is what folks are storing in their homes. And if we can get to the next picture, these are 2 firearms, and if you look closely, you'll see a 9mm and a .32 caliber. And these are the instruments to enforce the rules of the drug trade. And if we can go to the next photo, and this is some of the packets that we recovered and obtained through this investigation. And if you look, this is about 1,100 packets. Each one can represent a death sentence for anybody. And as someone who's done those cases and done delivery cases, it is a hard call to make when you have to talk to a parent, a mother, a brother about how their son died. And I just actually did this week upon a sentence we got last year when the defendant is going to be paroled and had to make that call to make sure they were informed of what was going on. Those are very tough questions to ask to receive in those matters, and very tough answers to give, because those folks aren't coming home. But I'll tell you this much, there's 1,100 packets that aren't on the street, and there's 2 guns that aren't coming back, and that's going to give the folks of that community that much more rest in this case. If you have any questions, I'll defer to the DA or myself.
Questions?
My name? His first name is Paul, P-A-U-L. Last name is Reddell, R-E-D-D-E-L. And unfortunately, or wherewithal, it starts with the color red, just like my hair.
So, we will,
Oh, it is the supervisor of the Dangerous Drug Offenders Unit.
yeah, we will be taking further questions at the end of the presentation. And any questions you have for Mr. Riddell, he'll be happy to answer at that time on this topic. All right, I do want to, Elliot, could you please go back to the first image? I just want to point out a couple of things before we move forward with this, because it may be helpful to you. So these are 2 separate photographs. I just want to make sure we're clear on that. Those are 2 separate photographs. The lower photograph is a close-up of something that is depicted in the upper photograph. The upper photograph, if you look closely, shows a plastic bag knotted that contains live ammunition, and that is the same image that you see down below. Next slide, please, Elliot. All right, so once again, you have two different photographic images. The upper one is from farther away. The lower one is from closer in. They are both depicting the same handgun. This gun is this gun, okay? My understanding is that that is a .32, am I correct?
32 caliber underneath and a 9mm.
Okay, so the revolver underneath is 9mm?
32.
It's 32. The revolver underneath, that has sort of a purple color, that is the .32. And the semi-automatic weapon on top of it, that would be the 9mm Ruger weapon we're referring to. Third slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you go back? Down here, in the bottom of that photograph, you will see drug packaging that has been tied up in a clear plastic bag. Next slide, please. And this is a depiction that I think sheds some light on the scale of the operation. What you're seeing here is fentanyl. Fentanyl takes up very little space. The packages are small. It is horrifically dangerous to human life. And here you'll see these little groups of packages that are bound with a rubber band. Those are commonly referred to in the street as bundles. They're usually 13 packages that are held together with a rubber band. There were about 80 bundles that were recovered here, so 80 times 13 is more than 1,000 packages, and even these packages look quite small. Please remember how incredibly potent and incredibly dangerous fentanyl is. The reality is that even though it is not always readily available, the number of fatal drug overdoses in the city of Philadelphia per year now is on the order of 1,200, something like that. You're basically looking at someone dies of a fatal drug overdose every time you sit down to take a meal. Obviously, our homicide situation is also of incredible interest. That's less than 1 person a day. We are speaking of fatal overdoses killing 3 to 4 people every day in Philadelphia, and overwhelmingly, the cause of those fatal overdoses is fentanyl that is either pure or it is mixed in, which is more common, with other substances. The people doing it are not chemists. They do not care about the safety of other human beings. And so it is very, very common that drugs that have fentanyl mixed into them are of totally unpredictable potency and are likely to be fatal, even to people who have been trapped in their addiction for 25 years. They're liable to be fatal, despite the fact that the person using it may believe they've taken the same dose as they've taken for many, many years. All right. So with that little bit of context, I would now like to move on And it is my pleasure, it is my honor to invite members of council who have been kind enough not only to be here, but to assist us so frequently with meetings of what is now known as the Kensington Caucus. I would like to invite all of them to come forward, share the microphone as they see fit, and make whatever comments that they would like to make.
Good afternoon. I'm Ketsi Lozada. I am the council member for the 7th Councilmatic District. Let me begin by saying thank you to District Attorney Krasner and everyone involved in this case. I'd also like to respond to his comment about our meetings and how often we are meeting and the partners and the stakeholders who have been at the table. Those meetings have been extremely important. They've been very successful. They are part of the reason why we are where we are today. And I think that we can all agree that while Kensington and the Harrogate community are not where they need to be, we are in a much better place than we were 30, 60 days ago. And that is as a direct result of the work that we have been doing collaboratively. And so I'm extremely grateful for everyone's commitment at the table to be able to come together. And although sometimes we don't agree, we always walk away on a very positive note and ready to continue moving the work forward and with a firm commitment of improving the quality of life for the residents of Kensington. And because of that, that is why cases like this are extremely important. We know the direct result of open-air narcotic sales and open-air narcotics use. We see the impact that they are having on that community, on the children and the businesses and the families in that community. And so, you know, I'm looking forward to continuing to work across organizations to be able to bring down organizations that have been established across the Harrogate, Kensington community that continue to impact negatively on those residents. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Councilman Harrity. For me, this is fantastic because I live literally a block away from where this young lady was selling her wares. My grandchildren walk around this neighborhood. As my colleague said, we are now working out of the silos, not one unit, one person, one organization doing their own thing over here. We are coming together to talk and to hash out where we don't agree and make strides where we do agree. And I just think that with this today, while our district attorney, as he said, this isn't Pablo Escobar, but this is a person that is directly responsible for destroying parts of that neighborhood. The guns we got off the street, you know, in my neighborhood, we know far well that what 2 guns can do in the hands of somebody who means to do harm. So I'm just grateful for the collaboration. I'm looking forward to working more with the mayor's office, the police department, the district attorney's office, and quite frankly, anybody who wants to help us out with this plight. There will be law and order, and this is just one step.
Good afternoon. I'm Councilmember Mike Driscoll, and I want to give my heartfelt thanks to District Attorney Krasner and Philadelphia law enforcement for doing what they've done. And we know that this isn't easy. When we formed this Kensington caucus, we took a burden that was ignored for a long time, and we know that we're going to be judged at the end of the day of how successful we're going to be. But that's not why we did it. We did it because we care about the people that live in Kensington. We care about those young children that are going to school, stepping over these folks and destroying their legacy. And we weren't going to allow the status quo to remain. And so when things like this happen, when we actually make a dent right there in the 3100 block of Kensington Avenue, we know that this federal government, the state government, the city government, and all aspects of law enforcement and city council all working together out of the silos they're talking about does make a difference. And the message we want to send is we're not done. This is just the beginning, and we're not going to finish until it's done right.
Thank you. I'm Councilmember Mark Squill in the 1st District, and as you know, all our districts sort of meet at Kensington Avenue, along with Councilmember Harity, who lives there and represents the whole city. But I think today's message is collaboration and coordination, as we heard, and it's really important to understand that, again, when we did work in silos, everybody was trying to do the right thing, but the collaboration and coordination that we see today through the DA's office, through the state police, through our city police officers, that's what makes these things happen. And what you saw today is an example of somebody who was out there poisoning our residents in the city of Philadelphia. They are providing chemicals that will kill people. And so this is very important to understand. As you saw with the resolution last week, where you're trying to help people get off the streets and get into treatment, right? It needs to be a bifurcated effort to make sure you're not only trying to help people get off the street who are addicted to these type of chemicals, but it's also the people who are providing these chemicals that are poisoning our residents, poisoning those people who live on the streets, and making sure there's consequences for them. So again, this is not an easy process. This will be a continued process, and as DA Krasner had said, the collaboration with all these folks, and a lot of these folks haven't even been in the room together ever. And, you know, the mayor's message is like one Philly and everybody working together to solve and come up with resolutions. You know, the courts are also involved in those meetings, have been brought into those meetings too. So it's not only the arrest and the prosecution, but then the courts and then possibly the sentencing if they're found guilty. All those things will be worked accordingly depending on each individual case. But I think the biggest message we take out of here is how the collaboration, coordination, how people are working together to come up with a solution that will address not only the people who are in addiction on the streets needing help and treatment, but those people that are making it really difficult for them and poisoning them day in and day out. So thank you.
Thank you kindly, members of council, and thank you so much for the work that you have been doing with us. Meeting to find that common ground and look for solutions moving forward, just one of which has been the suggestion now made for a few years, but not in that meeting is more recent, that there should be more wiretaps used in the city of Philadelphia. This is a vital tool. It took down Kip and Cambria. It's something that we could do more, but we have to have the machines, we have to have the training, we have to have the personnel. Doesn't cost a fortune. It can make a huge difference, but that's just one of the kinds of things, the kinds of nuts and bolts that we talk about within that room. All right, so I'm counting, I would say at least 13 possible members of the press. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm ahead of myself. Before I count all of you, let me just invite to come forward Bill Fritzie, who's the chief of our Gun Violence Task Force. Gun Violence Task Force has been very involved in this and many other criminal matters where there's a crossover between gun activity and drug dealing, and I'd like him to come forward and make a few comments.
Good afternoon. In many ways, Gun Violence Task Force and the Dangerous Drug Offender Unit obviously have different areas of focus. And when we talk about silos, that even occurs within our own office of who's going to prosecute a case depending on the amount of drugs or who did the investigation. When we talked about priority corners, and we were talking about Kensington, one of the biggest issues that came up was that we knew that the focus needed to be more on drugs, but we knew that there was violence in that area that needed to be solved as well, because guns and drugs go together. Gun Violence Task Force has an immense amount of technology and ability with digital forensics to go into phones, to look at social media, and to track these things down. So when the DA talks about wiretaps, he also is incorporating that idea of using cell phones that are recovered at the scene for narcotics investigations. And what you're going to see going forward is more collaboration between even the two units within this office, Dangerous Drug Offender Unit and Gun Violence Task Force. In this particular case, you saw that firearms were recovered. In the past, a case like this might have progressed through the court with just the prosecution of the drugs and the guns together, and we would have been done. We will not be done in this case. The firearms are going to be examined. They will be put into the NIBIN systems, the National Integrated Ballistics Information Network. The guns will be examined, determine if they're connected to any shootings or any types of violence, whether they were straw purchased. And that will be investigated by the Gun Violence Task Force. Any leads that come out of that will then be sent to the homicide unit or the shooting investigation team or whatever part of police department or law enforcement is involved. So it's a multi-level use of the equipment that we now have and the ability that we now have within Gun Violence Task Force to try and make an impact within the drug market in the Kensington area and these priority corners. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fritzie. I'm counting, and I may have missed somebody, but I'm counting 13 different people who may have either media questions or, in one case, a blog question. If I miss anybody, please let me know. We are going to try to give everybody an opportunity if they have a question, but I would request that you stay on this topic, given the number of people we have, given the purpose of this conference. If there are questions off this topic, I will stay around. Some of them I can't even answer in this space. If they're political, I might have to do it out front, and I would do that. If they're not political, but they're on a different topic, we may or may not be able to answer them, but I'll certainly hang around and find out what they are. All right.
On May 2nd, Mr. President.
Mr. Cipriano, you're not, I haven't called on you, sir. Sir, I haven't called on you, and it is not your decision who goes first. And I'm going to call on you last again, Mr. Cipriano, because you constantly disrupt these events. There are professional journalists here who work for legitimate journalistic outlets. They should be treated with respect, and you continually fail to do that. Mr. Cipriano, you do not determine this press conference. Mr. Cipriano, you do not determine the sequence of this press conference. Nathan Silvas, 3 CBS. Do you have any questions, sir? No, sir. All right. Annie McCormick, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a greater context of the level of this drug dealer. You were saying mid or large. I know the Councilman Parody said not a Pablo Escobar.
Right.
But can you give us an idea of how many people this impacted, maybe how many people this person was selling to, and I don't know what type of time frame you want to use, but just to give us a better idea to those that don't investigate drug use?
Sure, we're happy to do it, and I will also ask Mr. Riddell to assist. Obviously, whenever you take down a drug operation, you're not discovering all the drugs they have ever sold or all the drugs they would sell in the future if they were left to operate. You're just getting a snapshot of what they're dealing with. Here we have something on the order of 1,100 packets. These packets are usually either $5 or $10. So the street value, which is one way that we sort of grade these things, would be on the order of $5,500 to $11,000. This office, even though we haven't done media around it, is involved in a case that is a $50 million drug case. Okay, this case is not a $50 million drug case. As I said, more like $5,500 to $11,000 plus all the guns and God knows what they did the day before and would do the day after, right? In my mind, this is a mid-level case. It is not the kind of case that when I was coming up as an attorney in the 1980s and the 1990s, we saw all the time. Those tended to be 12 bags in the pocket of someone literally standing outside at a busy corner where cars or pedestrians were coming up all the time. This is a higher level than that. This is not just people who are living on the street suffering from addiction. These are professional drug dealers who are doing very serious, very damaging stuff. But the amount in question here I would characterize as being mid-level. Mr. Riddell, do you want to come forward and assist with that?
Certainly. And if you want to talk about the spectrum of drug dealers in this matter, so what I'm going to put at this, when you see the sales going on in this case, that person's not selling to drug addicts. That person is selling in bundles. Generally, there's nobody, if you're on the street and you're just barely surviving, you're buying a packet or two at a time. She's clearly selling, in this case, the defendant was selling in bundles. They're selling to another dealer. And that's where you have to think about, where there's people on the corner who are just literally selling, and some of them, they're just selling to break off a few, what they call it, break off a few to feed their own habits. This person is clearly not just feeding their own habits. They're feeding other drug dealers. So I would put this at a person who's, I wouldn't say you're managing a whole block, but you're clearly participating with other dealers to do distribution in the neighborhood. Does that answer your question?
It does. I have one more question too, and this could be for any of the council members, or you. As far as, sorry, okay, where we're going next. Oh, no, I know, I'm so sorry. In regards to where this, I don't know if you call it a flop house or whatever, it's right in that zone that was cleared last Wednesday. So I don't know when this bust happened, but I'm wondering if clearing that area
I don't want to give up investigative tools that maybe the Pennsylvania State Police used on a decision day. You know, it's also a manpower issue. It's a time to feel like when they're going to be safest in taking down a resident. I think that could all add into it, but I'm not going to comment specifically as to that day and why they made that choice. I would always defer to them and how they go about those cases. I'm sure council can have better information regarding how that impacts, and based on the clear out that's been happening and what that, and I'll just defer to Ms. Lozazzo.
I can just say that, you know, I don't know, right? We don't know the logistics of the investigation or the how and the when, but we know that being able to do the encampment resolution and having this, this operation be as successful as it was absolutely has a positive impact on the community, right? And we're hoping that in the collaborative work that we're doing, that we'll be able to see this across that community.
Thank you for that. I will say, without getting more specific, I'm aware that the investigation took months. I think it is fair to assume that the investigation was initiated before there was a plan to clear people out of a particular area, but beyond that, I have no further comment. Channel 10, Telemundo, Isabel Sanchez.
Hello, Fiscal. I'll just ask you in Spanish. If you could briefly tell us parte de tu comunidad acerca de la importancia de este esfuerzo. Mucha gente nos dice especialmente de access to drugs. Hay en Kensington, es una reivindicación.
Okay. I will try. Estamos aquí para discutir el arresto y los cargos en contra personas que están traficando en fentanyl. Fentanyl es una droga increíblemente peligrosa que mata a mucha gente, y lo que estamos aquí para discutir es una casa en donde vendían esa droga. Había una cantidad de más que 1,000 paquetes y un sistema allí de arreglar las drogas para venderlos. Tenemos, además de las drogas, unas armas que hemos recubierto. Esta sería una parte de nuestros esfuerzos juntos, trabajar en contra de esos que están traficando fentanyl y otras drogas en la área de Kensington.
¿Cómo este tipo de esfuerzo complementa el otro esfuerzo que ustedes vienen haciendo? Y no, hablando con la gente de la comunidad, dicen, maybe prestarle mucha atención a los adictos, eso no asunto que nos enfocarnos en la gente que realmente está vendiendo la droga. ¿Cómo responde tú a ese comentario de la comunidad y cómo te ayuda lo que ustedes llevan haciendo con eso?
Bueno, yo creo que es sumamente importante el deber que estamos trabajando juntos, ¿no? Porque vemos como casos como este nos ayudan a mejorar la calidad de vida, y entendemos pues que el proceso es frustrante, el proceso es largo, no sabemos cómo va a terminar la situación, pero definitivamente es un proceso muy importante que nos va a llevar a mejorar la calidad de vida en esa comunidad para todos.
All right, Leah Uko. The packages themselves usually are going for $5 or $10. I'll let Mr. Riddell, though, get more specific about these packets.
So an individual packet will go for anywhere from $5 to $10. So if you're buying in the street, you're usually buying in 5s and 10s.
How much does it cost to make, like to manufacture, like what kind of profit are you making? That's really cheap, $5.
Well, it's been cut so often, and so there's a lot more to elucidate and to get into if you want to talk about the profits. The profits are ginormous. Our group currently works with DEA, Financial Investigative Team, and there's a whole money transfer that we get involved with how these drug dealers profit from all this. And this is a $1 billion economy. Like, that's what you have to do. But if you want to get down to the nuts and bolts of that, we can go through that individually. I don't want to take up, it's probably going to take 15 minutes to go through the whole spectrum, what you buy a kilo for, what you're going to buy cut for, what you're going to break it down in each packet. But when you break that down, the profits are ginormous. I'm sure you're producing at least half of what you're buying for at the higher ends, when you take a kilo and break it down, and when you're going from there, you know, the individual street dealer is not making as much, but they're still profiting all the way through.
Thank you. So my question, you both have elaborated on, like, this is a mid-level drug bust, and it took an enormous amount of collaboration and work just to do a mid-level and just one. How, you know, like, how optimistic do you feel about, like, moving forward to do more and more operations like this? Considering she was just one, and there are tons, just in Kensington alone, all of Philadelphia. You know, like, how do you feel about that, the massive, the overall task?
Very optimistic, actually. But very optimistic if we are creative and we are thoughtful and we don't just repeat the mistakes of the past. Why? Because in my, you know, soon enough, 40 years of doing this work, I became very familiar with what happens down in federal court with federal agencies. Historically, that has been go get Pablo Escobar, big stuff, and the investigation takes 5 years, 4 years, 3 years. Not always, but that's pretty good sample. Meanwhile, in those almost 40 years, here I go to court and I'm seeing drug cases. Most of them involved young people on a corner selling small amounts of drugs. Most of them didn't even get into a house. They were simply taking down people actually committing that crime who would be replaced by the afternoon. There's always been this gap in the middle. The gap being the investigation. It does not take 5 years, but also doesn't take 5 minutes. It might take 3 months, 2 months, 5 months. But it is going to take down the operation that is employing all those kids on a corner. It's going to take down the operation that is fed by Pablo Escobar. This is an example of that, and it is something that in my mind is very important, that with the help of more wiretaps, more collaboration, could make a significant difference. It would be an innovation. It would be something new. It doesn't take away from those other two things. It certainly doesn't take away from going after big-time drug dealers, which is incredibly important. But it's one more layer that we can bring to it. And I am actually very optimistic if we can get the resources collectively. I don't care if it's my resources, but if we can get the resources collectively to do more of these 3, 4, 5, 2-month investigations where we're getting the professional drug dealers, not just people who are suffering from addiction who will replace them, that we're getting the multi-generational owners of these corners. Yes, that could make a tremendous difference. And really the only impediment to doing 10 or 20 of these in a year instead of, I don't know, 5, is just having the resources and the personnel to do it. So I am actually quite optimistic about that. All right, Tina Hogate, do you have any questions? All right. Mr. Cipriano, I will get to you in a minute. I don't see anybody else here disturbing the entire event.
That's part of our job in the DA's office.
Tasani Vejpongsa. Where's the, no questions? All right. Thank you. Rodrigo Torrejon.
Execution-style murder of Temple Police Officer Christopher Fitzgerald. You told reporters on May 2nd that you had only 2 days' notice about the House Judiciary Committee hearing held in
Mr.
Philadelphia.
Torrejon, do you have a question? I mean, I understand that Mr. Cipriano is doing a rock concert or something here, but the rest of us are actually here to participate in democracy.
That you lied, okay? He said 10 days before the hearing, to your face in a meeting in your office, he told you about that congressional hearing, and he told you he was going to appear as a witness at that hearing, okay? So if truth and accuracy are so accurate and are so important to you, why would you lie about something to reporters that can be so easily fact-checked?
Mr. Torrejon, do you have a question, sir?
So you're not going to answer Dr. Fitzgerald on that, are you? Excuse me, sir. I have every right to.
Ralph, can you stop harassing legitimate press? Can you stop it? You are disrespectful of these actual journalists. You are disrespectful of all the rules. Why are you even here? What is the point? That wasn't even a question. That was a speech worthy of Donald Trump. Why are you even here?
Donald Trump, what does Donald Trump have to do with Dr. Joel Fitzgerald, who accused you in a congressional hearing of lying about how many days' notice?
Mr. Torrejon, do you have a question?
So you're not going to answer that, Mr.
Mr. Torrejon, do you have a question?
That's your usual routine, to dodge a question. That's what you're doing right now, dodging the question. Plain and simple.
Historically, individual busts have had very little long-term impact. They're generally a few weeks, few months, and some of the trap houses go back operational, possibly in another locations, sometimes the same location. And I know it was mentioned that this is, the prior questions, this is somewhat of a mid-level bust feeding potentially larger distributors. So my initial question is, what makes this bus special? Or since this is kind of characterized as a mid-level bus, is this the start of a renewed push in Kensington? And is it done in concert with Mayor Parker's administration, since it's just a mid-level bus?
Well, thank you for the question. I think it's actually an interesting and a modern story about drug prosecution and drug enforcement in a few different ways. One of those ways is that it is a mid-level bust. You have stated the reality that we are not actually going to eliminate all drugs. That's not going to happen. That has never succeeded in world history. It's not going to happen here. But that doesn't mean you give up. It means that you try to manage it. You try to do the best you can. When you see what failed before, you try to improve upon it. One of the things that has failed before is when you're only doing the really big stuff and it takes years, and you're only doing the really little stuff and it's replaced before the end of the day with new workers. It's just not as comprehensive a strategy. I will say, so in that sense, I think it's a modern story. It's also a modern story because it's fentanyl. Fentanyl has unique qualities that make it incredibly dangerous. One of them being what a tiny amount can bring about a level of intoxication, which is also the reason that it brings about so many fatal overdoses. Because of its concentration, because of how tiny it is. To me, those are both relevant points. The focus on the people who do the harm, which include professional, mid-level drug dealers, big-time drug dealers, and then, of course, people on the corner are doing harm, but that's a whole different story about why they're there and how easily they are replaced. To me, all of those things make this significant, but then, of course, there's the reality that it is Kensington, and that we are 60 years in on a terrible opioid crisis in Kensington. And there is energy to use new techniques, creative techniques, to innovate, to use resources. Yes, of course, the mayor is in on that. These council members are in on that. We are in on that. The police are in on that. Our federal partners are in on that. We are dealing with a level of energy and collaboration that I think is a credit to this new administration, and I mean the mayor, but I also mean everybody else who is working as an elected official or working as in an appointed capacity in this administration. Obviously, Councilmember Ketsi Lozada, among others, among all of them, has taken a central role in trying to get this moving and trying to get it moving, even starting last year before we got going. Does that answer your question, Mr. Torrejon?
Yeah, I still have just an additional question. So based on the data, drug sale arrests have been way down citywide recently. So, but they are overwhelmingly concentrated in Kensington as an area. So do you think that's indicative of how much the drug market has consolidated there, or is it more indicative of law enforcement priorities? And another question that's kind of adjacent to that is people are concerned if the enforcement starts focusing, as Mayor Parker has said it will be, on Kensington, that some of the drug market might seep its way into other parts of the city. Is that something that your office is wary of, worried about? And if so, do you have some sort of strategy to anticipate that if it does happen?
Let me, if I missed one of your questions, my apologies, but let me try. So, whenever people try to make things better, sometimes there are reversals. Sometimes you zig and you end up zagging. I think a lot of us saw this when there was an effort to reduce the number of people who were essentially living by the train tracks in Kensington. And some of that was a success, and some of that was in the minds of people who live and work in Kensington not a success, because you were actually moving people to a place where they were more visible, and that has its issues. I'm not judging whether that was positive or not, but that's the reality. The reality is whenever you try to disturb a location that has been heroin central, or opioid central is the better term now, for 60 years, when you try to do that, there are going to be consequences. They're not all going to be good. But I think what is being said by the administration, a sentiment with which I agree, and by the administration I mean all these council members too, I think what's being said is we have to do more, and we have to do it in every area. We have to do more with treatment. We have to do more with housing. We have to do more with enforcement. We have to do enforcement that will be more effective than it used to be. I think all of these are tools in the toolkit. When you speak about the arrest, to me, that is a question more appropriate for the police commissioner, with whom I speak all the time. I wouldn't want to speak for him, but I think what you are seeing is certainly a reflection of a new energy and a new commitment during this mayoral administration to do things differently. It was not that long ago that we were in the pandemic, and Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw, whom I like, and whom I liked at the time, made a decision to do no drug arrests whatsoever. And she announced it. She did a press conference. She had a list of things we will not arrest for, and she had some very good reasons why she had to do that. There was no vaccine available. There's a limited number of police personnel. The process of arresting all the street corner dealers, putting them in the police car, taking them to a police station, had the potential to spread a fatal disease throughout the police department, effectively disabling the entire police department. And in that context, decisions were made for a period of time to arrest no one, not mid-level, not high-level, not low-level, drug dealers, okay? Needless to say, when that happens, and I think I totally understand why it happened, I think it was justified, but when that happens, you're gonna see some pretty low numbers for arrests. And then later, when COVID is waning, the pandemic is waning, you are gonna see significant increases. Obviously, we do not control how many arrests are made. We are sometimes closely involved in investigations, but most of these investigations are led either by federal entities such as DEA, or they are led by statewide or local law enforcement. They're mostly not led by lawyers, even though we're contributing vigorously when it comes to search warrants and when it comes to doing warrants for wiretaps and things like that. So I do think, Mr. Torrejon, if you want to get a little bit more from PPD on what they're planning to do, they may be able to supplement this answer. Did that answer your question at all?
Yeah, like, just quick kind of tag on that. So do you think this current opposite approach or inverse approach, where being more aggressive on those drug arrests as opposed to previous commissioner, sort of Parker and Flecker's approach, do you think that's justified, or are you on board from your office's standpoint?
I think what makes sense is not to do what has happened in prior decades, which is just rack up 16-year-olds with six packages in their pocket, as if that's a big achievement in the so-called war on drugs. I think the approach that makes sense is to be focused on the mid-level, professional drug dealers, the higher level, and they have never had an adequate focus, in my opinion, and high-level drug dealers. Obviously, there is still a role for arresting people who are standing on a corner and are selling small amount of drugs, but we know for a fact that simply being able to say we have 105 arrests, of 105 what? 105 pawns on the chessboard, that has not worked. So it's time to take some of the, let me see, rooks, knights. You know, it's time to get at the king and the queen if we are gonna compare this to a chessboard instead of just grabbing up a whole lot of pawns and saying, isn't that a large number of arrests? All right, so let me see. We have from HYY, we have Pat Loeb and Tom McDonald. I would hate to pick. No, I'm sorry. My apologies.
I'm just trying to understand this particular case. This was initiated by the state police. So was that Attorney General decision to catch them to this?
Mr. Riddell?
No, the Pennsylvania State Police have their own narcotics group, and they're constantly doing investigations, and that was part of the group. We were added on in the end point of the investigation to help and assist with getting warrants done, which we do all the time, and then we like to do add-ons. As the head of the gun violence task force, Mr. Fritzy, said that we want to start dumping all these phones, and we want to build out more of that information so we know what this is all connected to. Because currently, right now, the DDOU unit is embedded with, our agents are literally embedded as task force officers with DEA. We use their resource, but those are those very, very large cases. And we get access to things we wouldn't otherwise get access. But these are the kind of cases that change lives in those communities. And yes, I think the question was asked about, does this impact other things? And you've got to get in there, and you've got to sometimes pull up the rug and can sweep under all that, what's going on. So we get the people who are actually the dealers, who are actually impacting, and not someone who's just trying to survive. And we can divert those other folks into programs to help them out while we hold these folks accountable for what they're doing. So yes, in this case, it wasn't the AG's office. From my understanding, it was the Pennsylvania State Police self-initiated into investigations they were already doing into Kensington.
Okay, and there's one defendant
We're vertically prosecuting that, yes, already specially assigned a DA, and we'll take that all the way through.
Okay, and when was she arrested?
March 14th is when the actual, because they used, at the very last takedown, they were able to get the 50 bundles, which they made arrangements for, but had to come back later to actually do the arrest. And other members of the Philadelphia Police Department actually helped us, the state police, in getting that person arrested and charged.
Okay, so why
May 14th.
May 14th?
Okay. You're
All right, my apologies, Ms. Loeb, my apologies for misidentifying your affiliation. That is on me, my bad. Mr. McDonald, WHYY.
Not trying to go all Ralph on you, but your histrionics seem a little extreme. 60 years there's been a drug problem in Kensington. It seems like your numbers are a little off. How about 8th and Butler? How about the Badlands? I mean, Kensington hasn't been wrecked for 60 years.
Well, first of all, thank you for not going all Ralph on me. Second, in no way do I disagree with you that 8th and Butler was an ongoing fiasco for a very long period of time. I'm not saying this is the only place where there have been drugs, but it is 60 years. Kensington has been heroin central for 60 years. It has. I have had, listen, let me.
You didn't grow up in Kensington, sir. I think I have a little bit better knowledge of the neighborhood that I grew up in.
Well, okay, again, I don't want to quibble with you, but I would refer you to Bobby Cohen, Dr. Bobby Cohen, who was the chief medical officer for Rikers Island for many years, who spent his time in Philadelphia in the late 1960s, and in the late 1960s, he was organizing heroin users. We're talking 1968 in Kensington. He would disagree with that. I'm not going to question your authority for your own experience. I'm not going to question your experience. But there's also quite a bit of writing around this topic, and frankly, it would be news to me if it was not a central location for heroin on the East Coast of the United States for the last 60 years. Is it worse now? Yeah, it probably is. The opioid epidemic, thanks to large-scale pharmaceutical manufacturers and the work that they did to convince doctors of the lie that it is not fatal and addictive, certainly has made things worse. But I have also been going to Kensington since 1987 on a very regular basis for reasons we don't need to get into. And certainly I can say from my personal experience since 1987, this has been opioid central in Philadelphia. Well, I would refer you, again, I'm not going to quibble with your experience. I'm sure you're telling me accurately what you experienced. But I would suggest if you want to have that conversation, the one who can speak with more authority on it would be Bobby Cohen, the former chief medical officer for Rikers Island. I would suggest that there has been some rather significant criminological, sociological writing around this by a professor whose name I will get together for you that talks about that whole history. And that history of drug dealing is intertwined with the history of the decline of industry in those areas. It's intertwined with an influx of Puerto Rican people who were willing to take industrial jobs when the wages were dropping, and then the complete disappearance of industry from that area, giving way to a whole bunch of people who didn't have access to regular employment. And it is, needless to say, also closely associated with a city that is in essence a port city that has trains and has Route 95 going up and down. We all know where people go from Baltimore and where they go from Virginia Beach and where they go from points north to get significant quantities of drugs. They drive to Kensington from those places. So again, that's actually to me a really interesting topic, and if I have somehow missed the boat with all of the input I've had, I'd be happy to have that discussion with you in more detail. Let me try to at least get you that article as well. Is there anything else, Mr. McDonald?
Oh, thank you. Give truth and accuracy.
Mr. Cipriano, you're not next. You're not next. See, now you said you weren't going to go Ralph on me, and then he went Ralph on me. Yeah, I know. Philadelphia Tribune, Sherry Stone.
That all 3 future killers were arrested a total of 7 times in the past 6 years for offenses that included
Sherry Stone, do you have a question?
drugs, possessing an illegal
Yes, please, Ms. Stone. I understand Mr. Cipriano has no respect for anybody else in the field, but can you please? You know, I think everybody should know that Mr. Cipriano is now standing in front of Sherry Stone, who is a legitimate reporter from a legitimate journalistic outlet, not a blogger, and is preventing her from doing her job. What may I do for you, Ms. Stone? Ralph, leave her alone. Ralph, leave her alone. Step away from her and leave her alone.
Truth and accuracy are so important to you, Mr. Krasner.
Okay.
Tell the grieving Soto family
Ms. Stone,
that none of those killers should have been out on the street and had your office.
Ms. Torres,
Their son.
Mr. Tomchuk,
be alive.
I will see you in there.
Keep dying.
You will not be coming to these conferences anymore, Ralph.
Oh, what are you gonna do?
We are going to stop you from coming in because you are disrespectful to every reporter here. You observe no journalistic standard. You never follow the rules.
You don't know what
And
a
we have
journalist
put up
is,
with
sir.
your nonsense
You
now
don't know
for
what a journalist
years.
is. You're a
Okay.
fool, sir.
Well, I guess we could check about how you got the inquiry. Should we get into that?
Boy, you really are a fool.
For BetMGM Casino and leap into a world filled with all your favorite casino games.